They say hemlock silver kills a vampire in 180 seconds, 3 minutes flat. Clean. Clinical. Like flipping a switch. They're wrong. I know because I counted. Every single heartbeat. Every ragged breath that shouldn't have existed in a chest that hadn't needed oxygen for 680 years. 277 seconds. 4 minutes and 37 seconds of watching golden eyes fade to ash while my hands pressed against a wound that wept black blood onto white marble. 4 minutes and 37 seconds is a long time to watch someone die. Long enough to regret every choice that brought you to your knees in a vampire's penthouse at 3 in the morning. Long enough to remember the smell of your grandson's hospital room. Long enough to understand that some debts can't be paid in currency. My name is Raven Thorne. I'm 42 years old. Former Air Force pararescue, served Desert Storm in 1991. My husband died in a training accident in 2007. My son, my only child, died in an IED attack in Iraq in 2015, leaving behind an infant son. Now I'm guardian to Jacob, 9 years old, who needs $180,000 for experimental leukemia treatment or he dies before his 10th birthday. The night I spilled a 1947 Chateau Petrus, $50,000 in a single bottle, on the King of New Orleans, I didn't know 3 truths that would tear my world apart. First, that monsters are real, and they own half of Louisiana. Second, that my blood carries something ancient and deadly and more valuable than all the oil in the Gulf of Mexico. Third, that sometimes the only way to save a child is to offer your throat to a predator and pray he has enough humanity left to refuse. This is not a love story. This is not a fairy tale. This is a war story. And every war starts with a single drop of blood on expensive carpet. 72 hours earlier, I was not thinking about vampires. I was thinking about numbers, the kind that don't lie, the kind that pile up in collection notices and hospital bills and eviction warnings until they become a wall too high to climb. $180,000. That's what they wanted. Not asked. Wanted. The oncology department at Tulane Medical Center didn't deal in maybes or payment plans when you were talking about experimental leukemia treatment for a 9-year-old with 6 months to live. They dealt in numbers, cold, final, non-negotiable. I had $4,312 in my checking account, another $800 in savings that I hadn't touched because it represented 3 months of skipped meals and double shifts. My truck was worth maybe $5,000 if I found someone desperate enough. The apartment in the Garden District cost me $900 a month, and I was already 2 months behind, surviving on Mr. Brennan's patience and the fact that he'd known my husband before the training accident took him. The math didn't work. It never worked. I'd run the calculations 1,000 times, lying awake at 3 a.m. while Jacob slept in the next room, his breathing shallow from the tumors pressing against his lungs. Jacob didn't know how bad it was. That was the only kindness I could afford. When he asked why we were eating rice and beans again, I told him I was on a health kick. When he asked why I was gone most nights, working 3 jobs that barely covered rent, I told him I was working on something important. When he asked if he was going to get better, I lied through my teeth and said, "Yes, buddy, absolutely yes. You're going to grow up and be an astronaut just like you want." 9 years old, bald from the first round of chemotherapy that insurance had covered before they cut us off for exceeding lifetime maximums. Skin so pale you could see every vein like a roadmap of suffering. But his eyes, God, his eyes were still bright. Still believed in superheroes and happy endings and the fundamental goodness of a universe that was actively trying to kill him. He looked like his father, my son, the boy I'd raised alone after my husband died. The man who'd joined the army to pay for college and never came home. The hero who'd thrown himself on a grenade to save his squad and left behind a pregnant girlfriend who'd given birth 6 months later and then disappeared, leaving me a note and a baby. Jacob was all I had left, and I was losing him to a disease that didn't care about love or sacrifice or how hard you were willing to fight. The call came on a Tuesday. Mr. Brennan, my landlord, A grumpy 70-year-old Irish ex-boxer with hands like canned hams and a heart he pretended didn't exist. He knew people, the kind of people who owned the kind of establishments where morality was optional and cash was king. "There's a club," he'd said, not meeting my eyes. We were standing in his cramped office above the hardware store he'd owned for 40 years. The air smelled like machine oil and Old Spice and disappointment. Crimson Hall, French Quarter, they cater to a specific clientele, high-end, exclusive, the kind of place where senators and CEOs go to forget they have wives. "I'm not a prostitute, Mr. Brennan." "Christ, girl, I know that." He'd actually looked offended, his weathered face creasing with concern. "They need servers, cocktail waitresses, but it pays, $300 a night, cash. Sometimes more if you work the private levels, sometimes a lot more. $300 a night. 7 nights a week if they'd have me. That was $2,000 a week. $8,000 a month. $64,000 in 8 months if I never slept or ate or paid rent. Still not enough. Not even close. But it was something. Something was better than the nothing I had now. "There are rules," Brennan had continued, pulling out a worn business card from a desk drawer that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. The paper was thick, expensive, embossed with a single image, a chalice dripping red. "Don't ask questions. Don't look the VIPs in the eye unless they speak to you first. And for the love of God, Raven, if they ever send you to the penthouse level, you be careful. You be very, very careful." "Why, what's on the penthouse level?" Brennan had looked at me then, really looked at me, with eyes that had seen things he wished he could forget. "The man who owns that club, Lucien Devereaux, he hasn't aged a day since I was 20 years old. And I'm 73 now. You do the math." I'd taken the card because what choice did I have? Jacob needed medicine. Medicine cost money. Money required selling pieces of yourself until there was nothing left but the will to keep moving forward. That's what Desert Storm taught me. You don't survive by being brave. You survive by being stubborn, by refusing to quit even when every rational part of your brain is screaming that you're already dead, by pulling that pilot from the burning helicopter even when the enemy fire is so thick you can taste the gunpowder, by keeping pressure on wounds that won't stop bleeding because giving up means someone's mother gets a flag and a folded letter. I'd survived worse than serving drinks to rich men with secrets, or so I thought. The interview was a formality. They needed warm bodies who could carry a tray without dropping it and keep their mouths shut about whatever they saw. I qualified on both counts. The manager, a rail-thin man named Thomas, with skin so pale it looked translucent under the fluorescent lights of his office, had barely glanced at my resume before shoving a uniform into my hands. Not a typical black skirt and white blouse. This was designer, a silk dress in deep burgundy that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. The fabric moved like liquid mercury. The fit was perfect, uncomfortably perfect, like someone had measured me while I slept and tailored it to my exact dimensions. "You start tonight," Thomas had said. His voice was flat, empty, like a recording of a human rather than an actual person. Like he'd said these exact words 1,000 times to 1,000 desperate women. 9 p.m. sharp. Use the service entrance on Dauphine Street. Don't be late. Mr. Devereaux does not tolerate lateness." Who's Mr. Devereaux? Thomas had smiled then. It didn't reach his eyes. Nothing reached his eyes. They were dead things set in a living face. "Your employer. If you're very lucky, Miss Thorne, you'll never meet him. The girls who meet him don't tend to last long in this position." I should have walked out then, should have listened to the voice in my head that had kept me alive through firefights in the Iraqi desert. The voice that said when something feels wrong, it usually is. When the hair on the back of your neck stands up, there's a predator nearby. But I thought about Jacob, about his bald head and his brave smile, and the fact that his next round of treatment was due in 6 weeks, and without it, the leukemia would spread to his brain, and then there would be nothing anyone could do except make him comfortable while he died. I took the uniform. I ignored the voice. I made a choice. First mistake of many. Crimson Hall didn't look like a nightclub from the outside. It looked like a fortress. 3 stories of weathered brick and iron balconies, tucked between a closed antique shop and a building that might have been a warehouse or a tomb, or both. No neon sign, no velvet rope, no bouncer checking IDs. Just a heavy oak door with a brass knocker shaped like a serpent eating its own tail. The service entrance was around back, down an alley that smelled like rain and rotting magnolias and something else, something metallic that made my fillings ache. The door opened before I could knock. A woman in her 60s stood there, gray hair pulled back in a severe bun that looked painful. She looked me up and down with the clinical efficiency of a drill sergeant inspecting a recruit before deployment. "You're the new girl. Thorne." "Yes, ma'am." "I'm Mrs. Keating, head of house. You will address me as ma'am at all times. You will not speak to the guests unless spoken to. You will not ask questions about what you see or hear. You will pour drinks, clear plates, and vanish like smoke when your shift ends. Are we absolutely clear?" "Crystal, ma'am." "Good." She stepped aside, gesturing me into a narrow hallway that smelled like expensive cleaning products and fear. "Welcome to Crimson Hall. Try not to bleed on the carpets. They're 14th century Persian and worth more than your life." The comment should have been funny. Rich people humor about expensive things, but the way she said it. The absolute seriousness in her iron-gray eyes, the way her gaze lingered on my hands like she was checking for cuts. I had the distinct feeling she meant it literally. The interior of Crimson Hall was a study in controlled decadence, all dark wood and darker shadows. Gas lamps instead of electric lights, casting everything in amber and rust tones that made the space feel like you'd stepped into a photograph from the 1920s. The air smelled wrong. Not bad exactly, just wrong. Like ozone before a thunderstorm mixed with something metallic and organic that made my combat instincts whisper warnings I couldn't quite articulate. The main floor was surprisingly tame. 50 or so guests in evening wear, nursing cocktails at small tables while a jazz quartet played in the corner. The crowd looked exactly like you'd expect from a place charging $300 cover charges. Old money in custom suits. New money in designer dresses. Political money in the kind of expensive casual that screamed, "I'm too important to try hard." I worked the floor for 3 hours, poured champagne that cost more per bottle than I made in a week, cleared oyster shells and caviar spoons and tiny portions of food arranged like abstract art. Made myself invisible. It was easy. Years of military discipline had taught me how to move through spaces without being noticed, how to read a room for threats, how to identify the exits and calculate the fastest route to safety. And there were threats here. I could feel them. Not the obvious kind, the drunk congressman getting handsy with his aide, the CEO doing lines of cocaine in the bathroom with the door half open. Those were amateur hour, predictable civilian behavior. No, the real threats were the ones who barely moved, the guests who sat too still, who didn't blink often enough, who sipped drinks without drinking, whose eyes tracked me across the room with the patient focus of predators watching prey, waiting for the right moment to strike. I counted 7 of them by midnight. 7 people who made my spine tingle, and my pararescue training screamed danger, 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 in a voice I'd learned to trust with my life. At 1 a.m., Thomas appeared at my elbow like a ghost materializing from shadow. "Thorne, you're going upstairs." My stomach dropped. I thought I was on the main floor tonight. "Mrs.?" Keating said, "Change of plans." He handed me a bottle, old, dusty. The label was in French and featured a date that made my eyes widen, 1947. Chateau Petrus, one of 6 bottles in existence. The gentleman in the penthouse requested it specifically. He's been waiting. What happened to the regular server for that level? Thomas's smile was a razor wrapped in silk. She didn't work out. The penthouse is restricted access. You knock 3 times. You enter only when invited. You pour the wine, you leave, You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not make eye contact. You do not, under any circumstances, linger. Am I absolutely clear, Miss Thorne? Yes, sir. Then go. The elevator at the end of the hall. Top floor. Press the button marked P. Don't make me regret recommending you for this position. The last girl who disappointed Mr. Devereaux—" He trailed off. Let the implication hang in the air like smoke. I wanted to ask what happened to her. Wanted to ask why everyone in this building spoke in ominous riddles like they were auditioning for a gothic novel. Wanted to turn around and walk out the door and find some other way to save Jacob that didn't involve carrying expensive wine to mysterious penthouse dwellers who made experienced managers nervous. But I needed the money. Jacob needed the money. And I'd survived worse than rich men with expensive tastes and bad manners. So I took the bottle, $50,000 worth of wine. I cradled it like a newborn and walked toward the elevator at the end of a hallway that seemed to stretch longer with every step, the shadows deepening, the temperature dropping degree by degree. The elevator was old, pre-war, maybe pre-World War I. All brass fixtures and mahogany paneling polished to a mirror shine. No modern buttons, just a single brass lever and a panel with letters instead of numbers. I pulled the lever to P. The doors closed with a sound like a coffin ceiling. The ascent was smooth, silent, the kind of silence that made you aware of your own heartbeat, your own breathing, the sound of blood rushing in your ears. I counted floors by feel. 1, 2, 3. The elevator didn't stop. 4, 5, 6. Impossible. The building was only 3 stories from the outside. I'd counted. I'd looked up from the street. 7, 8. The letters on the brass panel kept changing. Or maybe they weren't letters anymore. Symbols, runes. My eyes couldn't quite focus on them, sliding off like trying to remember a dream. When the elevator finally stopped, I had no idea what floor I was on. No idea if I was even in the same building anymore. The doors opened onto darkness. Not dim lighting, not shadows. Actual darkness. The kind that existed before humans invented fire. The kind that has weight and texture and presses against your skin like cold water, trying to find a way inside. Then, a voice from the void. Deep. Resonant. Old in a way that had nothing to do with years. Enter. I stepped out of the elevator because going back down felt like admitting defeat, and I'd never been good at that. The moment my foot touched the floor, lights bloomed. Not electric. Candlelight. Hundreds of candles in silver sconces along walls that seemed to go on forever, stretching into impossible distances. The penthouse wasn't a room. It was a cathedral. 50 feet of open space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a version of New Orleans that looked simultaneously too bright and too dark, like the city was being viewed through a filter that removed something essential. And in the center of it all, facing those impossible windows, sat a man on a velvet chair that might as well have been a throne. He didn't turn when I approached, didn't acknowledge my presence beyond that single word of invitation. He just sat, perfectly still, staring out at the city like a king surveying his kingdom, or a predator watching his hunting ground. I could see him in profile. Sharp cheekbones that looked carved rather than grown, strong jaw, hair so black it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my truck, tailored so perfectly it looked like a second skin. No tie, collar open just enough to show pale skin. One hand rested on the arm of the chair. The other held a crystal glass, empty, waiting. Everything about him radiated power, not the political kind you saw in mayors and senators, not even the financial kind that came with money. Something older, more fundamental. The kind of power that doesn't ask permission because it doesn't need to. The kind that existed before laws and society and the thin veneer of civilization we pretend separates us from animals. My training kicked in automatically. Assess the threat. Find the exits. Plan the escape route. Calculate odds of survival. Except I couldn't move. Not frozen in fear exactly. Frozen in recognition. Like my body knew something my brain hadn't caught up to yet. Like every instinct I'd honed over 20 years of military service was screaming that this wasn't a man. This was something else wearing a man's shape. "The wine," he said, still not looking at me. His voice had an accent buried so deep you almost missed it. French, maybe. Worn smooth by centuries until it was barely noticeable. 1947 Waitress. I assume Thomas informed you of its value. Yes, sir. My voice came out steady. Good. $50,000 per bottle. Closer to 60 at current auction prices. But who's counting? Now he turned, slowly, deliberately, like he had all the time in the world and wanted me to know it. And I saw his eyes, gold. Not brown with flecks of gold, not hazel in certain light. Solid, molten gold, with vertical pupils that dilated when they locked onto me, widening like a cat's, in darkness. Not human, not possible, but undeniably, terrifyingly real. "You're new," he observed. Not a question. A statement of fact delivered with the weight of absolute certainty. Thomas has been cycling through servers at an alarming rate recently. "Tell me, Miss Thorne. Raven Thorne, sir. Miss Thorne." He stood and the movement was all wrong. Too smooth, too controlled. Like a predator pretending to be human and not quite getting the details right. "Do you know why the previous servers failed to meet my expectations?" I thought about lying, settled for partial honesty. "No, sir. They were afraid. Fear has a smell, Miss Thorne. Sharp, acidic, like copper pennies and adrenaline mixed with sweat. It spoils the atmosphere, makes it difficult to relax." He moved closer, each step measured and precise. "You're afraid. I can smell it on you. But you're hiding it well. Discipline. Military training?" "Air Force, sir. Pararescue." Something flickered in those gold eyes. Interest, maybe respect. Ah, the ones who run toward the helicopter crash while everyone else runs away. Survival training, combat medicine, uncommon courage or uncommon stupidity, Miss Thorne? "Both, sir, depending on the day." The corner of his mouth twitched. Almost a smile. "Honesty, how refreshing. Pour the wine, Miss Thorne. Let's see if your hands are as steady as your voice." I approached the low table in front of his chair. Expensive, antique, probably 17th century if I was reading the craftsmanship right. Probably worth more than Jacob's entire treatment. I set down the silver tray Thomas had given me with hands that only shook slightly. Retrieved the corkscrew. The bottle was old, fragile. The cork had probably fused with the glass over 78 years of aging. I worked slowly, carefully, applied even pressure. The cork came free with a soft sigh, intact, perfect. The wine inside was the color of old blood, deep red, almost black in the candlelight. It smelled like roses and earth, and something underneath that smelled distinctly like iron. I reached for the decanter. Crystal, heavy, ornate, probably baccarat. Poured the wine with the smooth motion I'd practiced 100 times at home with cheap bottles and tap water, preparing for this job, for this moment, for the chance to earn enough to save Jacob. The liquid swirled in the decanter, caught the light, released a scent that was simultaneously beautiful and deeply unsettling. I leaned over to pour into his glass, reaching across his shoulder because that's where the empty glass sat on the low table, extended my arm, tilted the decanter with careful precision, and that's when my heel caught on the thick Persian rug. Everything slowed down. The kind of time distortion that happens in combat when your brain processes information faster than your body can react. I felt my balance shift, felt my center of gravity betray me, felt the decanter slip from my suddenly sweaty grip as I tried to correct, overcorrected. Made it worse. No. The wine didn't just spill. It cascaded. A waterfall of $60,000 liquid splashing across his shoulder, soaking into the immaculate charcoal suit, spreading across his chest like a wound, staining the fabric an even darker shade. The decanter hit the edge of the table. Crystal exploded. Shards of glass flew in every direction like shrapnel from an IED. I tried to catch them. Pure instinct. Stupid, impossible instinct. A jagged piece sliced across my palm. Deep. Through the skin, through the fat layer, into the muscle beneath. Blood welled up immediately. Hot. Red. Pulsing in time with my hammering heart. "Oh, God," I gasped. The words ripped out before I could stop them. I'm so sorry. I'll pay for it. I'll work for free. The silence that followed was absolute, not just quiet. Silent, like the air had been sucked out of the room, like sound itself had stopped working. The weight of it was physical, pressing against my eardrums, making my chest tight. The man stood, slowly. Wine dripped from his shoulder in fat drops that looked black in the candlelight. Glass crunched under his Italian leather shoes. He turned to face me, and the room went cold. Not cool, not chilly. Cold. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant, frost webbing across the impossible windows, my breath coming out in visible clouds. "You're bleeding," he said. His voice had changed, deeper, rougher, like gravel grinding against velvet. Like a human voice layered over something that had never been human at all, something old and hungry and barely contained. I looked down at my hand. Blood dripped onto the Persian carpet. Each drop hit the antique fabric with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence, like bombs falling in the distance. "I'm sorry," I repeated. My training was trying to kick in, apply pressure, elevate. Control the bleeding, but I couldn't move. Couldn't think past the fear that was now screaming through every nerve in my body, the primitive hindbrain recognition of predator and prey. "I'll clean it. I'll replace the rug. He moved. One moment he was standing 5 feet away. The next he was in front of me. I didn't see him cross the distance, didn't see his feet touch the ground. He was just there, close enough that I could feel the cold radiating off him like he was carved from winter itself, like touching him would give me frostbite. He grabbed my wrist. His skin was ice, hard, smooth, like marble pulled from a frozen lake and given motion. He brought my bleeding hand up to his face. I squeezed my eyes shut, waited for pain, waited for teeth, waited for whatever happened to people stupid enough to bleed in front of monsters. But he didn't bite. He inhaled. A long, deep breath. His eyes fluttered closed. His expression shifted into something that looked almost like pain, like ecstasy, like a starving man smelling food for the first time in years, knowing he can't have it, but unable to stop himself from wanting. "Impossible," he breathed. His eyes snapped open. The gold was darker now, swirling with shadows, moving like liquid metal. "Vitalis, after all this time, I can smell it. Lilies and ozone and something older, something from before. I don't understand. Who sent you?" His grip tightened on my wrist. Not painful, but immovable, like being held by a statue. "Who knows what you are, what you carry?" "Nobody sent me. I'm just a waitress. This is my first night. I need the money. My grandson is sick. I need to pay for his treatment. I don't know what you're talking about." I was babbling. Fear and confusion and the slow creep of shock, making words tumble out in a desperate stream. His eyes narrowed. Really looked at me for the first time. Saw past the uniform. Saw the exhaustion etched into every line of my 42-year-old face. The desperation. The frayed cuffs of the coat I'd left by the service entrance. The cheap shoes I'd tried to make look professional with polish. The weight of someone who'd been fighting too long with too little. And then he smelled it again. My blood. Still dripping from my hand onto his carpet. He released my wrist abruptly, like I'd burned him. Stepped back. Turned away. His hands were shaking. Actually shaking. A tremor running through his entire body. "Leave," he commanded, voice rough. "Now. Before He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. The way his voice cracked. The way his shoulders tensed. The way he pressed his fists against the window hard enough to make the glass groan under the pressure. I should have run. Should have grabbed my coat and gotten as far from Crimson Hall as my legs could carry me. Should have listened to every instinct screaming that I was in the presence of something that could kill me without effort. But I was para-rescue, trained to run toward danger, not away from it. And something in his voice, that crack, that hint of desperation underneath the command, that tremor in his hands. He wasn't trying to scare me. He was trying to protect me from himself. "I'm sorry about the wine," I said quietly, firmly. The voice I used with injured soldiers who were panicking and needed an anchor. "And the suit. And the carpet. But I need this job. I need the money. If there's any way I can make this right." "You can't." He still didn't turn around. "There is no making this right. Go home, Miss Thorne. Go home to your grandson. Forget about Crimson Hall. Forget about me. Forget you were ever here. Find another way. I need $180,000 in 4 months or my grandson dies." The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled, waiting to explode. Silence. Long enough that I thought he hadn't heard me. Long enough that I started to back toward the elevator, decided this was a lost cause, started planning which pawn shop would give me the best price for my wedding ring. Then he spoke. 3 words, quiet, certain, absolutely terrifying in their implication. "I'll pay it." I froze. "What?" "Your grandson's treatment. I'll pay for it, all of it. Tonight. The full amount. Wire transferred within the hour, on one condition." This was a trap. Had to be. Nobody offered that kind of money without strings, without costs that couldn't be calculated in dollars and cents, without taking something that couldn't be given back. What condition? He finally turned. The gold in his eyes had dimmed back to something almost normal, almost human. But I could see the effort it took, the control, the sheer force of will required to pull whatever he really was back behind the mask of civilization. "You work for me, not as a server, as my personal medical attendant. Your training, your skills, your blood." "My blood? It's rare, Miss Thorne. Invaluable. The scent alone." He closed his eyes, breathed deeply, like an addict resisting temptation. "It's been 246 years since I've encountered a Vitalis bloodline. The last one was my sister, Amelie, 1780. She was killed for what she carried in her veins, drained over 3 days by someone who wanted her power. I don't understand what that means." "You will." He crossed to a mahogany desk I hadn't noticed before, each movement careful and controlled, pulled out a leather portfolio. Inside was a contract, typed, formal, legal language that would take a lawyer to fully parse. $15,000 a month, paid on the 1st. Your grandson's medical expenses covered in full as a signing bonus. Housing provided if needed. Duties include managing my correspondence, my schedule, and providing blood samples as needed for medical research purposes. Blood samples, drawn by a licensed phlebotomist, no more than twice a week. Standard donation amounts, 1 pint maximum. Nothing that will endanger your health or ability to function. He held out the contract. "This is not a negotiation, Miss Thorne. This is the only offer you will receive. Accept, and your grandson lives. Refuse, and you walk out that door with nothing but the memory of the most expensive wine you'll ever spill and a debt to Crimson Hall for damages that will follow you for the rest of your life." I looked at the contract, at the numbers typed in neat rows, at the clauses written in language I'd need a lawyer to fully understand, but could grasp the essentials of: employment, compensation, duties, termination conditions. 15,000 a month, 180,000 a year. Jacob's treatment covered in full. No more collection calls. No more lying awake calculating how many days I could go without eating to afford his medication. No more watching him get weaker while I pretended everything would be okay. All I had to do was work for a man who wasn't a man, give him my blood. Trust that whatever the hell a Vitalis was, it wouldn't get me killed. "There are rules," he continued, voice regaining its composure. "Rule 1. You knock 3 times before entering any room I occupy. Always, no exceptions. Rule 2. You do not question what I eat or drink. What you see in this building stays in this building. Rule 3. He paused, looked at me with an intensity that made my breath catch in my throat. "If you ever bleed again in my presence, if you cut yourself, if you injure yourself, if a single drop of your blood touches the air when I'm near, you run. You run as fast as you can. You lock yourself in the nearest room with a door. You do not open that door for me, not for an hour, not even if I beg. Do you understand? No. You don't need to understand. You just need to obey, for your own safety. I thought about Jacob, about his bald head and his brave smile, and the way he still believed in happy endings, even though his body was actively betraying him. About the doctor's prognosis. 6 months, maybe less. The leukemia was aggressive. Without treatment, it would spread to his brain, his bones, his liver. He'd die in pain, confused about why his Nana couldn't save him. With treatment, he had a chance. 60% survival rate. Not great, not guaranteed, but infinitely better than zero. If I sign this, I said slowly, carefully, do I get the signing bonus tonight? Wire transfer within the hour to any account you specify. And you won't hurt me. I will do everything in my considerable power to ensure your safety, Miss Thorne. That is the most honest answer I can give you. Notice how he didn't say yes, didn't promise, just stated intent and ability. Lawyer's language. Vampire's language, apparently, but beggars can't be choosers. And I was so far past begging, I'd circled back around to desperation. I picked up the pen, expensive, heavy, probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget, probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. One more question. Yes? What are you? He smiled. It was not a comforting expression. It was the smile of something that had forgotten how to be human, trying to remember the mechanics. You're pararescue, Miss Thorne. You've pulled dying soldiers from behind enemy lines. You've performed field surgery with nothing but a combat knife and morphine. You've seen things that would break civilians. You're trained to stay calm in the face of impossible situations. That's not an answer. No, he agreed, but it's all you're getting tonight. Sign the contract or don't. But choose quickly. I'm running out of control, and you're running out of time. I looked at my bleeding hand, at the drops of blood on the carpet that had started this whole impossible conversation. I thought about Jacob, about promises I'd made at my son's funeral, standing in Arlington Cemetery while they played taps and folded the flag, promises to protect his son, to save him, to be the person my boy would have wanted, the grandmother he deserved, no matter the cost. I signed my name. The moment the pen left the paper, something changed in the room. The temperature, the pressure. Like a spell breaking, or a contract sealing, or a door closing that could never be opened again. He took the portfolio, slid it back into the desk with careful precision. When he turned back to me, his expression was unreadable. Mask firmly in place. Welcome to my world, Miss Thorne. Your first day of actual employment begins tomorrow, 4 p.m. Thomas will give you the address of Devereaux Tower, my office. Do not be late. The tower? My office. Where you'll be working during business hours, not here. This, he gestured to the penthouse, to the candles and the impossible windows and the blood-stained carpet. This is where I live, where I hunt, where I remember what I am when the mask gets too heavy to wear. He crossed to a cabinet, pulled out a first aid kit that looked military grade. Better than military grade. Tossed it to me. I caught it one-handed, pararescue reflexes still sharp. Bandage yourself. I can smell you bleeding from here, and it's taking every ounce of discipline I possess not to... He cut himself off, turned back to the window, pressed his forehead against the glass. Go. Now, while I still have control. I wanted to ask more questions, wanted answers to the 1,000 things that didn't make sense, wanted to understand what I'd just agreed to, but the way his hands were clenched into fists hard enough to crack the windowsill, the way his reflection in the window showed eyes that had gone completely black except for a thin ring of gold fire, the way the temperature had dropped another 10 degrees and frost was spreading across the floor, I went. The elevator ride down felt faster than the ride up, or maybe time was just moving wrong, reality bending around whatever that penthouse was. Everything felt wrong. The air, the sounds, the way my hand throbbed where the glass had cut deep enough to scar. I stumbled out into the alley behind Crimson Hall. The New Orleans night air hit me like a physical force. Warm, humid, real. I sucked in breath after breath, trying to convince my body that I was safe. I was alive. I had just signed a deal with something that definitely was not human, and somehow that was the best decision available. My phone buzzed. A notification from my bank. Deposit received, $180,000. I stared at the number, at the zeros that represented Jacob's life, at the proof that whatever had just happened in that impossible penthouse was real and binding and irrevocable. I'd saved Jacob's life, and in the process I'd sold mine to a monster who smelled my blood like wine and spoke of his sister dead for 246 years. I wrapped my hand in gauze from the first aid kit, military training taking over. The bleeding had already started to slow. Keep pressure, control the damage. Survive to fight another day. I walked back to my truck. Drove home through streets that looked the same but felt different, like I'd crossed some invisible threshold between the normal world and something else, something darker, and there was no going back. Jacob was asleep when I got home, curled up on the couch with his favorite blanket and a book about astronauts. His chest rose and fell with steady breaths. His face was peaceful in a way it hadn't been in months, unburdened by the pain he never complained about. Tomorrow I'd call Tulane Medical Center, schedule his treatment, watch the impossible become possible because a man with gold eyes had decided my blood was worth more than money. Tonight I sat on the floor next to the couch, watched my grandson sleep, and wondered what I'd really signed away in that penthouse. Wondered if the cure was worth the cost. Wondered if I'd just saved Jacob's life or condemned us both to something worse than death. In the darkness, my bandaged hand throbbed in time with my heartbeat. And somewhere across the city, in a penthouse that shouldn't exist, a predator stood at his window and thought about the scent of lilies and ozone and blood that smelled like his sister's. The contract was signed, the debt was paid, the war had begun, and I didn't even know what I was fighting yet. The wire transfer cleared at 6:47 a.m. I watched the numbers appear on my phone screen while Jacob ate breakfast at our small kitchen table. Oatmeal with brown sugar and cinnamon, his favorite. The first meal in 3 months, I hadn't had to calculate the cost of down to the penny, measuring out exact portions to make the canister last another week. $180,000. It sat in my account like a bomb waiting to explode, transforming everything. Too much money. Too fast. The kind of windfall that came with strings attached, hooks buried deep in flesh, pulling you toward obligations you couldn't escape. "You okay, Nana?" Jacob's voice pulled me back to the moment. He was looking at me with those two old eyes, 9 years old, but cancer had aged him in ways that had nothing to do with years. When you're dying, you get good at reading adults, at spotting the lies they tell to protect you. "I'm great, buddy." I pocketed the phone, forced my face into something resembling normal, smiled. Real this time, because the money was real, and that meant hope was real. "Actually, I've got good news, really good news." "Yeah?" His spoon paused halfway to his mouth, suspended in cautious optimism. "I got a new job, way better pay, which means—" I paused, let the anticipation build, watched his eyes widen with hope he was afraid to show. "We can afford the treatment, the experimental one, doctor. Morrison said if we can pay for it up front, he can start as early as next week." The spoon clattered into his bowl, oatmeal forgotten. He stared at me like I just told him Santa was real and living in our building and wanted to give him everything on his Christmas list. For real? Not for real, for real, for real, for real. He launched himself at me, 70 pounds of bald, dying 9-year-old wrapping his arms around my neck, hard enough to hurt. Hard enough that I felt his ribs through his thin t-shirt. I held him, felt him shake with sobs he'd been holding back for months, felt the tears soaking into my shirt. Happy tears, relief tears, the kind I hadn't seen from him in so long I'd forgotten what they looked like. "I'm going to get better," he whispered into my shoulder, voice muffled and thick. "I'm actually going to get better." "You're going to get better," I confirmed, making it a promise, a vow. and prayed to a God I'd stopped believing in somewhere between Desert Storm and my son's funeral that I wasn't lying to this child I loved more than my own life. The address Thomas had given me led to a building in the central business district that looked like it was trying to stab God. 40 stories of black glass and steel called Devereaux Tower, because of course it was. Subtle as a sledgehammer, imposing as a tombstone. I dressed carefully that morning, business casual, slacks that weren't too worn, a blouse I'd ironed twice, the kind of outfit that said professional without screaming, trying too hard. My hand was still bandaged from last night, the cut deep enough that I'd probably need stitches but couldn't afford the ER visit. It throbbed with my pulse, a constant reminder of the deal I'd made. The lobby was all marble and money and cold efficiency. A security desk staffed by 2 guards who looked like they moonlighted as linebackers. Elevators with mirrors so polished I could see every exhausted line on my 42-year-old face, every gray hair I hadn't had time to color. "Raven Thorne," I told the guard, trying to sound confident. "I have an appointment with Mr. Devereaux." He checked his computer with the bored efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Nodded, handed me a key card on a lanyard. 40th floor. Private elevator on the right. Penthouse access only. Don't lose that card. Replacements cost $5,000. $5,000 for a piece of plastic. Of course, everything in this world was expensive in ways I was only beginning to understand. The private elevator was different from the one at Crimson Hall. Modern, sleek. It rose smooth and fast, numbers ticking up normally, no impossible floors or shifting symbols. Just a soft chime and doors opening onto an office that looked like money and power had a baby and raised it on intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking New Orleans like the city was a toy. Furniture that was probably older than Louisiana statehood. Antiques worth more than houses. And behind a desk made from a single slab of black marble that must have weighed a ton, Lucien Devereaux. He looked different in daylight, or what passed for daylight through the heavily tinted windows. Less predator, more businessman, charcoal suit, no tie. Reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed documents that probably controlled more wealth than most countries' GDP. He glanced up when I entered. The gold eyes were muted behind the glasses, almost passing for unusual but human. Almost. "Miss Thorne, punctual. I appreciate that quality." He gestured to the leather chair across from him. "Sit. We have much to discuss about your new role here." I sat. The leather chair was probably worth more than my truck. Everything in this office was worth more than my entire existence. It should have been intimidating, designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. It was intimidating, but I'd been intimidated by bigger things. Gunfire, IEDs, watching my son's casket lowered into the ground, the diagnosis that told me Jacob had maybe 6 months to live. This was just money and the monster who owned it. "Your grandson's treatment begins Monday morning," Lucien said. Not a question, but a statement delivered with the certainty of someone who'd already made all the calls, pulled all the strings. "Dr. Morrison has been informed that cost is no longer a concern. Jacob will receive the best care available in this hemisphere. Top priority, whatever he needs, whenever he needs it. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You haven't earned it." He removed his glasses, folded them with precise movements that looked practiced over centuries. "Your duties are as follows. You will arrive at 4 p.m. daily. You will manage my correspondence. Most of it is property acquisitions, legal documents, business proposals from people trying to take my money. You're former military, so I assume you can read contracts and spot the obvious attempts to defraud me." "I can read contracts, yes, sir." "Good. You will also manage my schedule. I have business interests across 6 states and 3 countries. Meetings, negotiations, the occasional necessity of reminding people that defaulting on debts to me is inadvisable for their continued health." The way he said that last part, casual, like discussing the weather. but with an undertone that suggested the reminders were probably permanent and involved shallow graves. Additionally, he continued, pulling out a folder, twice weekly you will provide blood samples. A phlebotomist will come here to the office. Standard donation procedures, 1 pint maximum. You will eat iron-rich foods, stay hydrated, take the supplements I provide. I will not have you becoming anemic on my watch. You're no good to me if you're dizzy and weak. What do you do with the blood? His expression didn't change, but something flickered in those gold eyes. Warning. Rule 2, Miss Thorne. You do not question what I consume. That rule exists for your protection as much as mine. Right, the rules. I was already testing boundaries. Your workspace is through that door. He pointed to a mahogany door I hadn't noticed, carved with intricate patterns that looked older than the building. Everything you need is there. Computer, files, access codes. Mrs. Keating will brief you on the security protocols. This building has enemies, Miss Thorne. Some human, some not. The protocols exist for your protection. Not human, I repeated, testing the words, like you. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, acknowledging the truth without confirming it. Like me, he agreed quietly. Though I am significantly older and more dangerous than most of the things that might want to harm you. Which brings me back to Rule 3. If you bleed in my presence again, what do? Run, lock a door, don't open it for an hour. And why? I met his eyes, held his gaze even though every instinct said to look away from a predator's direct stare. Because whatever you are, blood makes you lose control, specifically my blood. Not just any blood, Miss Thorne, your blood. He stood, walked to the windows, hands clasped behind his back. New Orleans spread below him like a kingdom he ruled from the shadows. Vitalis blood is rare, 1 in 10 million, maybe less. The science is unclear, but the effect is absolute. We, vampires, can smell it from 100 yards away. And once we do, once we taste it, the hunger becomes... He paused, searching for words that could capture something inhuman. Overwhelming, maddening, like every addiction you've ever heard of, compressed into a single moment. Vampires. He'd said it out loud, confirmed what I'd suspected but hadn't wanted to believe, what seemed impossible even with the evidence of my own eyes. Your sister Amelie, she was Vitalis, yes. 17 years old, beautiful, brilliant. She smelled like summer lilies and approaching storms, exactly like you do. His voice was flat, empty, the tone of someone who'd told this story so many times, the pain had worn smooth like a river stone. In 1780, a vampire from Texas, 300 years old, powerful, ambitious, tracked her scent to our estate outside Baton Rouge. He killed our parents, took Amelie, drained her over the course of 3 days to maximize the blood harvest, to extract every drop of power. His voice was flat, empty, the tone of someone who'd told this story so many times it no longer hurt, or hurt so much he couldn't feel it anymore, had to lock it away to function. I found what was left of her in a cellar, and I made a choice. I tracked that vampire across 3 states. I killed him with my bare hands, beat him until there was nothing left but ash and rage. And in doing so, I caught the attention of an older creature, one who saw my grief and my fury, and offered me the power to ensure it never happened again to anyone I cared about. She turned you. Her name was Morgana, 900 years old at the time, dead now, destroyed in a council purge in 1923. But she gave me this. He gestured to himself, to the impossible body that hadn't aged a day since 1780, eternal life, eternal strength, and eternal hunger. The cost of protection is becoming the thing you sought to destroy. The universe has a sense of irony. I processed this, tried to square it with reality, failed completely. So vampires are real. How many? In New Orleans, perhaps 200. Worldwide, tens of thousands. We hide in plain sight, Miss Thorne. We own your banks, your hospitals, your police departments. We are the politicians you elect, and the CEOs you work for, and the landlords who raise your rent. We are everywhere and nowhere, and the only rule that matters is the masquerade. Humans cannot know what we are. If they know, they panic. If they panic, they hunt. If they hunt, we go to war, and nobody wins that war. History is full of purges that nearly destroyed both species. Except I know. You are an exception. Bought and paid for. The contract you signed includes a non-disclosure agreement enforced by methods significantly more permanent than lawsuits. His tone was matter-of-fact, explaining reality without judgment. Tell anyone what I am and you will disappear. Not a threat, a fact. The Council does not tolerate exposure risks. The Council. The governing body of vampire society. 5 elders, ancient creatures who've survived since before America existed. They enforce our laws and maintain the balance between our world and yours. They know about you now, about your blood, and they are watching very carefully to ensure you do not become a problem that needs solving. This was insane. All of it. Vampires and councils and genetic markers that made my blood irresistible to undead predators. I should walk out, take the money and run as far as it would carry me, disappear into a life where monsters weren't real. And I wasn't sitting in an office discussing blood magic with something that drank synthetic hemoglobin to avoid killing people. But Jacob, the treatment, the money already deposited, already allocated to Hope. I was trapped. Had been from the moment I spilled that wine and bled on that carpet. Understood, I said, because what else was there to say? Lucian turned from the window, studied me with those unsettling eyes that saw too much. You're taking this remarkably well. I've seen worse. Have you? Desert Storm. I pulled a pilot from a burning helicopter while taking enemy fire. His face was melted off. Both legs were gone below the knee. He was screaming for his mother and trying to die, and I had to keep him alive long enough to get him to the field hospital. So, yeah, I've seen worse than vampires in expensive suits. Something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe. Recognition of a fellow survivor. You'll do, Miss Thorne. You'll do just fine. The first week passed in a blur of contracts and correspondence and learning the rhythms of a world that operated on different rules than the one I'd known. Lucian kept strange hours. He'd arrive exactly at sunset, work through the night with inhuman focus, disappear before dawn like clockwork. I never saw him eat, never saw him drink anything except the temperature-controlled thermoses that arrived via courier at 8 p.m. sharp every night, delivered by people who never made eye contact. I didn't ask what was in those thermoses, Rule 2, but I could guess. The way he looked at them with something like relief, the way his posture relaxed after drinking, the sharp edge of hunger in his eyes dulling to something manageable. The way the temperature in the room would rise a few degrees, like the cold that surrounded him was fed by deprivation. Blood. Synthetic. Lab-grown. Whatever technology had made it possible to feed vampires without killing humans, without breaking the masquerade. The work itself was straightforward enough. Review acquisition proposals for properties across 6 states. Schedule meetings with lawyers and contractors and city officials who probably didn't know their biggest donor was technically dead. Answer calls from people who spoke in careful code about territory disputes and feeding rights and other phrases that made my skin crawl, but I pretended not to notice. Mrs. Keating came by twice that first week, taught me the security systems with military precision, the panic buttons hidden under my desk, in the bathroom, by the elevator, the safe room behind the bookshelf in case of emergencies, stocked with food and water and a sat phone. What kind of emergencies, I'd asked, needing to know what I was preparing for. The kind where Mr. Devereaux's enemies decide your leverage worth taking. She'd said it like discussing grocery lists, utterly matter-of-fact. You're human, fragile, valuable because of what you mean to him. That makes you a target for anyone who wants to hurt him. Stay alert. Trust no one outside this office. And if someone offers you a drink you didn't pour yourself, assume it's poisoned until proven otherwise. Cheerful workplace orientation. The phlebotomist came on Wednesday evening, professional woman in her 50s, efficient and kind. Drew 2 units of blood with practiced ease, labeled them with codes I didn't understand, paid me in cash, $500 per session on top of my salary. Left without a word about what the blood would be used for. I ate steak that night, spinach salad, foods rich in iron, stayed hydrated like I was training for a mission, took the vitamins Lucian provided, high-quality supplements that probably cost more than my grocery bill, treated my body like the asset it had apparently become. Jacob's treatment started Monday. I took him to Tulane Medical Center, held his hand during intake, watched him get hooked up to IV lines pumping experimental drugs into his veins, watched him get sick, vomiting into a basin while nurses adjusted dosages, held his hand when the pain got bad enough that even morphine barely helped. Dr. Morrison was cautiously optimistic, the kind of optimism that came with disclaimers and statistics and 5-year survival rates that weren't guarantees but were better than certain death. But it was more than we'd had before, more than 0%. And that made every drop of blood I gave, every hour I spent managing vampire business, worth it. Thursday evening of my second week, I met Silas Core. He arrived at the office at 7 p.m. exactly. I was reviewing a property deed for a warehouse complex in Algiers when the elevator chimed. The doors opened, and a man stepped out who radiated the same wrong energy as Lucian, the same predator in human skin quality. Mid-40s in appearance, probably centuries old in reality. Tailored suit in charcoal gray. Silver hair swept back from a face that looked carved from pale marble. Eyes that were gray, bordering on colorless, like fog or smoke. He moved with that same too smooth grace, each step placed with inhuman precision. "You must be Miss Thorne." His voice was cultured, British accent worn smooth by time until it was barely noticeable. He extended a hand. "Silas Core, I serve as Mr. Devereaux's financial advisor. I've been managing his assets for the past 120 years. I shook his hand, cold, like touching marble pulled from a freezer. "Raven Thorne. I'm the new assistant." "So I've heard. Quite the promotion from serving drinks at Crimson Hall." His smile was polite, empty, didn't reach those fog-colored eyes. "Lucian speaks highly of your organizational skills and discretion. I just follow instructions, a valuable trait in this line of work." He moved past me with familiar ease, knowing exactly where everything was, which drawers held which files, where Lucian kept his private documents. "I need to review the quarterly financial reports. Lucian is expecting my analysis by tomorrow evening. Do you know where he keeps the Hong Kong investment folders?" "Third drawer on the left," I said, remembering from my orientation. He settled at the secondary desk across the room, pulled out a laptop, started working with the focus of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, fingers flying across the keyboard. I went back to my own work, but something nagged at me, the way he'd moved through the space with such proprietary ease, the way he seemed to know more about Lucien's business than I did after 2 weeks, the slight edge of something in his tone when he'd mentioned my promotion. An hour later, Lucian arrived. The temperature dropped 5 degrees when he walked in, frost webbing across the windows. I'd learned that was normal. Vampires ran cold, literally. "Silas?" Lucian's greeting was neutral, professional. "I didn't expect you tonight. The Hong Kong acquisition requires immediate attention. The sellers are getting nervous about the delayed closing. I need your signature on the revised offer before they pull out." Silas stood, documents in hand. They talked business, numbers that made my head spin. Billions in assets, property portfolios spanning 3 continents. Investments in companies I'd heard of and some I hadn't, all generating returns that seemed impossible. I half listened, focused on my own work, until Silas's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned slightly, stood abruptly. "Excuse me, I need to take this call. It's Shanghai. Time-sensitive market issue." He walked to the far corner of the office near the windows, turned his back to us, raised his phone to his ear, spoke in low tones I couldn't quite hear from across the room, but I could see his reflection in the window, could see his fingers moving across his phone screen in the distinctive pattern of typing, not talking, texting, while pretending to be on a call. My para-rescue training kicked in automatically. Observation, pattern recognition, threat assessment. People who lie about phone calls are hiding something. People who hide things in this world are usually threats. I memorized his posture, the way his shoulders tensed, the number of seconds he spent typing, 47. That was a long text. Or multiple messages, too long for a brief update. He returned after 2 minutes, smile back in place. Apologies. Shanghai markets are demanding. Everything moves so quickly there. Indeed, Lucian agreed, signing the document Silas had prepared. Thank you for handling this personally. Silas collected the papers, left with professional efficiency, nodding to me on his way out. When the elevator doors closed, I stood. Something wrong? Lucian asked, looking up from his work. Maybe. Probably nothing. But Silas said he was on a call with Shanghai. He frequently is. Our investments in Asian markets require constant monitoring. Why? He wasn't on a call. He was texting. I saw the reflection in the window. His fingers were typing, not his mouth moving. Lucian went very still. The kind of stillness that made you remember he was a predator. That the businessman mask was just that, a mask. You're certain? Positive, sir. I watched him type for 47 seconds. That's not a brief message, that's a conversation. Interesting. Lucian pulled out his own phone, scrolled through something with increasing focus. He told me last week that he doesn't text anymore, claims it's insecure for financial discussions, prefers encrypted voice calls only. Then why lie about this one? An excellent question, Miss Thorne. He set down the phone, looked at me with new assessment in those gold eyes. You have very good instincts. I'm alive at 42 because of my instincts, sir. Then trust them. If you see Silas acting strangely again, tell me immediately. He has served me loyally for over a century. But loyalty can be bought if the price is right, and I have many enemies with very deep pockets who would love to see me destroyed. I filed that away, watched, waited, paid attention to things that didn't quite fit. 3 days later, I saw it again. Silas arrived at 11 p.m. on a Sunday. Unusual. Lucian was out, meeting with city officials about zoning regulations for a new development project. I was alone in the office, organizing files and catching up on correspondence. Working late, Silas observed, his reflection appearing in my computer screen before I heard him. Catching up. Mr. Devereaux generates a lot of paperwork for one person. That he does. 680 years of accumulated business will do that. Silas moved to Lucian's desk, started going through drawers, not frantically, methodically, like he was looking for something specific and knew exactly where to find it. Can I help you find something, mister? Core? I asked, keeping my tone professional. Just checking inventory. We're due for an audit next month. Want to ensure everything is in order before the accountants arrive. He was lying. I could tell. Not from any vampire power, just from 42 years of reading people, of knowing when someone's words didn't match their body language, the slight tension in his shoulders, the way he avoided eye contact, the fact that he'd never mentioned an audit before. He found what he was looking for, a leather journal. Lucian's personal notes. I'd seen him write in it during meetings, recording details about territories and alliances and feuds that went back centuries. Silas photographed several pages with his phone. Quick, efficient, professional espionage. Put the journal back exactly where he'd found it, careful to match the angle. Then he saw me watching in the reflection of the dark window. His expression didn't change, but his eyes did. Calculating, measuring whether I was a problem that needed solving, how much I'd seen, how much I understood. Administrative records, he said smoothly, pocketing his phone. For my quarterly report to the council, standard procedure. Right, he smiled. Empty, cold, the smile of something that had forgotten how to be human centuries ago. You're very observant, Miss Thorne. Has anyone ever told you that curiosity can be dangerous in our world? In the Air Force, we called it situational awareness, Mr. Core. It's what keeps you alive when people are shooting at you. Indeed. Well, he collected his laptop, movements careful and controlled. I'll be going. Tell Lucian I'll send the audit findings tomorrow. And, Miss Thorne, perhaps it's best not to mention my visit. Lucian can be particular about his private workspace. He might not appreciate knowing I was here without his explicit permission. It was a threat, politely delivered, but a threat nonetheless. Of course, Mr. Core, have a good evening. He left. I waited until the elevator doors closed, counted to 60. Then I called Lucian. He answered on the first ring. Raven, what's wrong? Silas was just here. He photographed pages from your private journal, the leather one you keep in your desk. Then he threatened me when he saw me watching. Told me not to tell you about his visit. Silence on the other end, long enough that I thought the call had dropped, that maybe underground parking garages didn't get good reception. Then Lucian's voice, quiet, deadly, the voice of something very old and very dangerous. What time did he arrive? 11:07 p.m. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Lock the office doors. Do not open them for anyone except me. And Raven? Yes, sir? Thank you. You may have just saved my life. Lucian arrived in 8 minutes, moving through the office with lethal grace that made the businessman mask slip completely. He was all Predator now, checking his desk, his files, the journals Silas had photographed. His hands moved with precise efficiency, cataloging what had been compromised. These pages, he said quietly, voice-controlled fury, contain information about my feeding schedules, my security rotations, the locations of my safe houses across 3 states. The names of humans under my protection. He looked up, eyes burning gold in the dim office lighting. Someone is gathering intelligence on how to destroy me, and they're using Silas to do it. Who would want that information? I have suspicions, but I need proof before I make accusations to the council. Accusations without evidence are career-ending in vampire politics. He pulled out his phone, made a call. Thomas, I need surveillance on Silas Core starting immediately. Everything. Calls, texts, locations, financial transactions. I want to know everyone he speaks to and everything he does. Report directly to me, no one else. He hung up, looked at me with something that might have been gratitude if vampires felt such things. You may have just saved my life, Miss Thorne. Or you're paranoid and he really was doing an audit. In 680 years, Miss Thorne, paranoia has kept me alive more reliably than trust ever did. He sat heavily in his chair. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked tired, actually tired. Silas has been with me for 120 years. He's managed my finances through recessions and expansions, advised me through territory disputes and council investigations. I thought him loyal. I trusted him. Maybe he is loyal. Maybe there's an explanation. Maybe. But he didn't sound convinced. Didn't sound like he believed in explanations anymore. 2 weeks later, the explanation arrived wearing a white suit and a smile that belonged on a shark. It was Saturday night. Crimson Hall was hosting a charity gala for some cause I'd already forgotten. Black tie event. New Orleans elite rubbing shoulders with old money families who'd been running this city since before the Louisiana Purchase, back when it was still French territory. I wasn't supposed to be there. My job was office work, not events, but Lucian had asked me to attend. Not as staff, as his guest. He needed someone he could trust in the crowd, someone watching for threats while he played the role of philanthropist billionaire. I'd borrowed a dress from a co-worker. Simple. Black. Nothing fancy. Felt completely wrong wearing it among women dripping in diamonds, worth more than houses, and men whose watches cost more than Jacob's entire treatment. Lucian was across the ballroom, talking with the mayor about infrastructure projects, playing the role perfectly. The charm, the easy smile. You'd never know he was a 680-year-old predator unless you looked too close at his eyes, saw the age there. I was near the bar. Nursing champagne I had no intention of drinking, needing to stay sharp, scanning the crowd, looking for anything out of place. That's when I felt it. A shift in the room. Temperature, pressure, like a storm rolling in off the Gulf, heavy with threat. The crowd parted without quite knowing why. And through the gap walked a man who made every vampire I'd seen look tame by comparison. He was tall, 6'4" maybe, built like someone who'd spent 3 centuries perfecting violence as an art form. White suit that probably cost more than a luxury car, tailored to perfection. Sandy blonde hair that looked deliberately messy in that way that takes effort to achieve. And eyes, not gold, not gray, purple. Deep, unnatural violet that caught the light and reflected something alien back, something that had never been human. He moved through the crowd like a king reviewing subjects. People stepped aside without knowing why, smiled nervously, avoided direct eye contact on pure instinct. He was heading straight for me. I set down my champagne, evaluated exits, calculated odds, came up with nothing good. The nearest exit was 30 feet away through a crowd. I'd never make it if he decided to stop me. He stopped 3 feet away, smiled. It was a beautiful smile, all white teeth and charm and charisma. And underneath, the promise of violence barely contained. "You must be the Vitalis." His voice was smooth, musical, southern accent that sounded like Mississippi by way of eternity. "I could smell you from the street, like standing outside a bakery at dawn, absolutely intoxicating." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Liar." He stepped closer. I held my ground on pure stubbornness. "Magnus Vale, I own Houston. Dallas, most of Texas, really. 300 years of accumulated ambition. And I've come to New Orleans to discuss business with Lucian, the kind that involves you specifically." "I'm not for sale, Mr. Vale." "Everything's for sale, sweetheart. It's just a matter of price." He reached out, fingers extending toward my face like he had the right to touch me. "Don't touch her." Lucian's voice cut through the noise of the gala like a blade through silk. He'd crossed the room in seconds, now stood between Magnus and me, the charming billionaire mask completely gone. This was the predator, pure, undiluted, ancient. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an instant. Frost webbed across champagne glasses. People nearby shivered and moved away without consciously knowing why, driven by survival instincts older than civilization. Magnus smiled wider, genuinely amused. "Touchy, I like it. Shows you're invested in your property. State your business or leave my territory, Magnus. You're not welcome here." "Your territory?" "Lucian, the council disagrees. You hold New Orleans on borrowed authority that's looking shakier by the day, and your grip is slipping. That incident with the Baton Rouge pack last month, the missing humans from the French Quarter, the elders are asking very pointed questions about your competence." "Lies, planted by someone who wants to destabilize my position." "Are they?" "Because I have testimony from reliable witnesses, evidence that suggests you're losing control, breaking the masquerade, keeping alive Vitalis without proper council approval." Magnus's purple eyes found mine again, hungry and cold. "She's a liability, Lucian, an exposure risk, the kind that gets territories revoked and vampires executed for incompetence. She's under my protection, for now, but protection is fragile. Especially when your own people are selling you out." Magnus pulled out his phone with theatrical flourish, showed Lucian something on the screen. "Silas says hello, by the way. He's been very helpful, very informative about your schedules, your security weaknesses, your feeding habits, worth every penny of the $5 million I paid him." Lucian's hands curled into fists. The air crackled with barely restrained violence. "If you've harmed him, harmed? I've liberated him, paid him what he's worth. Very motivating for a vampire who's felt undervalued after a century of loyal service without proper recognition." Proof. Delivered with casual cruelty designed to wound. Silas hadn't just been gathering intelligence. He'd been bought, turned, working for Magnus the entire time, probably for months. "The council convenes tomorrow night at midnight," Magnus continued, clearly enjoying this. "The Undercroft. You and your Vitalis will stand trial for violations of the sacred masquerade. They'll decide if you're competent to hold this territory or if someone more capable should take over management." He looked at me, licked his lips like I was a meal he was anticipating. "I do hope they rule in my favor. I haven't tasted Vitalis blood in 3 centuries, not since I drained your sister back in 1780. Amelie was delicious, Lucian, absolutely divine. I imagine your pet here will be even better, fresher." Everything stopped. The music, the conversations. Time itself seemed to freeze as the implication hit home. Lucian moved, faster than thought. His hand closed around Magnus's throat, lifted him off the ground. The white suit crumpled. Magnus's smile never wavered, even as his feet dangled. "Careful," Magnus choked out, still smiling. "We're surrounded by humans, witnesses, security cameras. Attack me here and you prove their case. Break the masquerade in front of 500 people and the council will have your head on a pike by dawn." Lucian held him there. I could see the war playing out across his face. The desire to kill, the discipline not to, the centuries of control fighting against rage that had been building for 246 years. He dropped Magnus, stepped back. When he spoke, his voice was measured, controlled, absolutely lethal. "If you touch her, if you so much as breathe in her direction without her explicit consent, I will find you. I will take my time. And I will teach you what 680 years of accumulated anger looks like when it finally breaks free of all restraint." Magnus straightened his suit, smiled, unaffected. "See you tomorrow night, old friend. May the best monster win." He walked away, disappeared into the crowd, left behind the scent of ozone and threat and promises of violence. Lucian turned to me. His eyes were black, completely black except for thin rings of gold fire. "We need to leave, now." "What just happened?" "A coup. Magnus has been planning this for months, maybe years. He's bought Silas, manufactured evidence of my incompetence, and now he's forcing a council trial to seize my territory and claim you as a prize." "Why me specifically?" "Because Vitalis blood is power incarnate. With it, he can walk in sunlight without burning, heal injuries that would kill normal vampires. He'd be unstoppable, the strongest vampire in North America. And he's the one who killed Amelie, who drained my sister over 3 days to harvest her power. I've been looking for proof for 246 years, and he just confessed in front of witnesses." Lucian grabbed my arm. Not rough, but urgent. "The trial is tomorrow at midnight. If we lose, you become his property, and I become ash scattered to the wind." We left through the service exit, climbed into the Maybach waiting in the alley, driver already there like he'd been expecting emergency extraction. "What do we do?" I asked, as the city flashed past the tinted windows. Lucian stared out at New Orleans, his city, his kingdom, his prison. "We prepare for war," he said quietly, "and we pray the council is in a merciful mood, though they rarely are." The summons arrived at dawn, not a phone call, not a letter delivered by courier. A dead crow nailed to my apartment door with an iron spike. Tied to its leg was a scroll sealed with black wax bearing the crest of a double-headed serpent eating its own tail. I opened it with shaking hands that had held steady through enemy fire, but trembled now. "The High Council of the Vampire Nation hereby summons Raven Thorn, human, and Lucian Devereaux, Vampire Lord of New Orleans, to stand trial for violations of the sacred masquerade. Charges: harboring a Vitalis without council approval, exposing vampire nature to an unsanctioned human, allowing territorial disputes to escalate to violence threatening exposure. Trial will be held at the Undercroft. Midnight. Attendance is mandatory. Failure to appear will result in immediate execution warrants for both parties." I called Lucian. He answered before the first ring finished. "You got yours too," he said. Statement, not question. "What happens at this trial?" "We stand before the 5 elders. They hear evidence from both sides. They render judgment based on 6,000 years of accumulated law and precedent. If we're lucky, they fine me heavily and place you under stricter supervision with regular council monitoring. If we're not lucky." He didn't finish. Didn't need to. The implication was clear enough. "Jacob," I whispered, thinking of my grandson, "if something happens to me, I've already arranged everything. Trust fund administered by the First National Bank. Legal guardians selected and vetted. The treatment will continue without interruption. Whatever happens tomorrow night, your grandson survives and thrives. That much I can guarantee." I should have felt grateful, should have thanked him for thinking ahead. Instead, I felt rage, pure, incandescent. "I didn't sign up to die for your vampire politics." "No. You signed up to save a child, and you did. You succeeded completely. The rest is just consequences of living in a world more complicated than you knew." He paused. "I'm sorry, Raven. I should never have involved you in this. Should have let you walk away that first night. Should have been stronger." "Would you have? Let me walk away?" Silence. Long, heavy, honest. "No," he admitted finally. "You smelled like Amelie, like hope I'd thought dead for 246 years, like the possibility that maybe I could care about something other than survival. I was selfish, and now you're paying the price for my weakness." The line went dead. I looked at Jacob through his bedroom door, still asleep on Spider-Man sheets, bald head on his pillow, chest rising and falling with steady breaths. The treatment was working. Dr. Morrison had said so yesterday. 60% survival rate climbing to 70. He was going to live. And I'd sold myself to vampires to make that happen. Tomorrow night, I'd stand trial in a place called the Undercroft. Face creatures who'd been alive since before Columbus. Defend my right to keep breathing, all for the chance to watch my grandson grow up. I touched his forehead gently, kissed his bald head, whispered, "I love you, Jacob. No matter what happens tomorrow, I love you more than anything in this world." Then I started preparing for war. Because if Magnus Vale thought I was just some fragile human he could claim like property, he was about to learn what an Air Force pararescue combat medic looks like when she decides the mission is worth dying for. And the mission was simple. Survive. Protect Lucian. Keep Jacob safe. Everything else was just details written in blood. The Undercroft existed in a place that shouldn't be possible according to any law of physics or architecture I understood. We entered through the parking garage beneath Devereaux Tower at 11:30 p.m., 30 minutes before the trial. Lucian placed his palm against a concrete wall that looked like every other concrete wall in the subterranean level. Stone ground against stone with the sound of ancient mechanisms that predated modern engineering. A section of wall swung inward on hinges that should have rusted to nothing centuries ago, revealing a tunnel that descended into darkness so complete it seemed to have weight. "Stay close to me," Lucian said. His voice echoed off wet stone in ways that suggested the tunnel was far larger than the flashlight beam revealed. "The path is older than America, older than European settlement. The vampires who built this understood that true power requires foundations deeper than any basement, roots that reach down to bedrock and beyond." Gas lamps flickered to life as we walked, ignited by our presence through mechanisms I couldn't see. Not electric, actual flame and glass housings. The air smelled like earth and time and something else. Something that made my combat instinct scream that we were walking into a tomb that hadn't been opened in decades. We descended for what felt like miles. The temperature dropped with each step, my breath coming out in clouds. Lucian moved beside me, one hand on my elbow, steadying, protective. The way you'd guide someone toward their execution while apologizing that it had to be this way. "What should I expect down there?" I asked. My voice sounded small in the tunnel, swallowed by distance. "The council consists of 5 elders. Theron is the oldest and most powerful, 900 years. He fought in the Crusades, saw empires rise and fall like seasons. He's fair but absolutely merciless. If he believes you're a threat to vampire society, he'll order your death without hesitation or remorse." Comforting. "The others are equally ancient, equally dangerous. They've survived centuries by being smarter, faster, and more ruthless than everyone who challenged them. Do not lie to them. They can smell deception in your sweat, hear it in your heartbeat. Do not show weakness. They interpret it as permission to destroy you, and whatever Magnus says, whatever evidence he presents, remember that you are under my protection. That means something in our world, not everything, but something. The tunnel opened into a chamber that stole my breath and replaced it with ice. The undercroft was a Roman amphitheater carved from living stone by hands that had worked in darkness. Circular, massive. Stone benches rose in tiers, disappearing into shadow above. Gas lamps cast everything in bronze and blood-colored light that made shadows dance like living things. And in the center, on a raised platform of black marble, sat 5 thrones made from iron and bound with silver chains. The thrones were occupied, 5 figures in robes of heavy velvet, gray, black burgundy. Their faces were pale as death, skin like parchment stretched over ancient bone. Their eyes reflected the lamplight like animals caught in headlights, glowing with colors that had nothing to do with humanity. 200 vampires filled the stone benches, silent, watching, waiting. I recognized some from Crimson Hall, others from business meetings. All of them radiated that same predatory stillness, the patience of creatures who measured time in centuries rather than heartbeats. And standing in the center of the arena floor wearing that white suit like a victory banner, Magnus Vale smiled. Lucien Devereaux. The voice came from the central throne, resonating through the chamber like a bell struck in a cathedral. Deep, ancient, older than empires. You stand accused of harboring a Vitalis without council sanction, of exposing our nature to an unsanctioned human in violation of the masquerade, of allowing territorial disputes to escalate beyond acceptable parameters. How do you plead? Lucien stepped forward, releasing my arm. He'd changed clothes, black suit, no tie. He looked like what he was, a king standing before judges who could strip everything away with a single word. I plead necessity, Elder Theron. The Vitalis came to me by accident. A workplace incident. I offered her employment and protection under the ancient right of sanctuary. Her blood has been used solely for legitimate medical purposes. She poses no threat to the masquerade. She understands the consequences of exposure. No threat? Magnus's voice dripped false concern, playing to the crowd. She knows what we are. She works in your building with access to sensitive information. She has access to your files, your schedules, your vulnerabilities, and her blood. He turned those violet eyes on me with naked hunger. Her blood could make any vampire unstoppable. She is a weapon waiting to be claimed by whoever has the strength to take her and the wisdom to use her properly. She is a person, Lucien said quietly, dangerously. Not property, not a weapon. A human being under my protection. Semantics designed to obscure the truth. Magnus gestured, and Silas Core stepped from the shadows behind the thrones. The vampire who'd served Lucien for 120 years looked smaller somehow, diminished, defeated. He wouldn't meet Lucien's eyes. I have evidence. Testimony from Mr. Devereaux's own advisor, his most trusted servant. Tell them, Silas. Tell the council what you told me. Silas's voice was barely above a whisper, carrying in the silent chamber. Lucien has been feeding from the Vitalis directly, not synthetic blood from the labs. Her blood. Fresh. I've seen the containers in his private refrigerator, smelled the residue. He's becoming addicted to her. He's losing control slowly but inevitably. The chamber erupted in whispers, hisses, the sound of 200 predators sensing weakness in an alpha, smelling blood in the water. Lies, Lucien said, but his voice lacked conviction because there was truth buried in the fabrication. He'd smelled my blood, wanted it with desperate hunger, fought against that want every single day I worked for him. I have bank records, Magnus continued, pulling out a tablet with theatrical precision. Payments from Devereaux accounts to offshore holdings in the Cayman Islands. Money being moved, hidden. Patterns that suggest he's preparing for something. War, perhaps. Using the Vitalis as a strategic resource to build power. "Those are my retirement investments," Lucian said through gritted teeth. "Legitimate financial planning. Diversification recommended by every advisor." Or the actions of a vampire preparing to go rogue, to break from council authority and establish an independent territory with a Vitalis as his power source. A direct threat to the balance we've maintained for centuries. Theron raised one hand. Silence fell like a guillotine blade. "These are serious allegations with serious implications. If true, Lucien Devereaux, you have violated the fundamental laws of our society. The Vitalis must be secured for the safety of all, either turned into one of us to neutralize her blood's potency, or eliminated to prevent her from becoming a weapon in the wrong hands." My stomach dropped. Turned meant vampire, undead, eternal hunger, never seeing daylight again without burning, never aging, never dying. Watching Jacob grow old and die while I stayed frozen at 42 forever. Eliminated meant exactly what it sounded like. A clean death if I was lucky, something worse if I wasn't. There is a third option. Lucian's voice cut through my panic like a blade. I invoke the right of protection, ancient law, older than this council, older than the Crusades. If you believe the Vitalis is dangerous, then let me prove my ability to guard her properly. Trial by combat. If I win, she remains under my protection with full council immunity from interference. If you lose, you both die," Theron finished, ancient eyes studying Lucian with something that might have been respect or pity. "The right of protection has not been invoked in over 2 centuries. It requires you to face a champion of the council's choosing, to the death. No surrender, no mercy, no interference from allies. Are you absolutely certain this is the path you choose?" Lucian looked at me, gold eyes burning with something I couldn't name. Regret, maybe, or determination, or the weight of 246 years of guilt finally finding a purpose. "I am certain." "Very well." Theron gestured to the shadows behind the thrones. "Behold the executioner, unchained and unfed since 1802, fed only on the blood of traitors and oath-breakers for 2 centuries. If you can defeat this creature, Lucien Devereaux, then perhaps you do possess the strength to guard a Vitalis against all threats." From the shadows behind the thrones, a gate opened with the grinding of ancient metal that sounded like screaming. Heavy footsteps shook the stone floor, each impact like a hammer blow. Something emerged into the lamplight. The thing that stepped into the arena wasn't a vampire. It was bigger. Wrong. 8 feet of muscle and scar tissue poured into a vaguely humanoid shape that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd only heard humans described secondhand. Gray skin stretched over bones too thick to be natural, too dense to be anything born. It wore armor made from black iron and silver chains that clinked with each movement. In its massive hands, a warhammer the size of a small car, the head covered in dried blood. The executioner roared. The sound rattled my bones, made my ears ring, drove into my chest like a physical blow. 200 vampires flinched. Even the elders looked uncomfortable, shifting on their thrones. Lucian didn't flinch. He removed his jacket with careful precision, rolled up his sleeves. When he looked at me, his expression was calm, resigned, already saying goodbye. "When the fighting starts," he said quietly, voice meant only for me, "you run. Back to the tunnel. Back to the surface. Don't look back. Thomas will be waiting with the car at the garage entrance. He has instructions, documents, everything you need to take care of Jacob, to keep him safe." "Lucian, promise me, Raven, whatever happens down here, you survive. You get Jacob his treatment. You watch him grow up. You live the life you've earned. Promise me." I wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him I was para-rescue, trained to run toward danger, not away from it. Trained to save people, not abandon them. But the look in his eyes stopped me. This wasn't a request. It was a dying man's final order. "I promise," I lied. The executioner charged. The speed was wrong. Something that massive shouldn't move that fast, shouldn't cross 30 feet in 2 seconds. But it did, the warhammer swinging in an arc designed to pulverize Lucian into paste against the stone floor. Lucian moved, blur, shadow. Barely there, the hammer smashed into stone where he'd been standing a microsecond before. Cracks spider-webbed across the floor. Chunks of rock flew like shrapnel, embedding in the stone benches. He countered. Faster than my eyes could track even with combat training. His fist connected with the executioner's ribs with a sound like a car crash. The creature stumbled, shook its head, roared again. Lucian dodged, struck, dodged again, each movement precise. Economical. 680 years of accumulated combat experience distilled into pure efficiency, every motion perfected through centuries of survival. But the executioner didn't tire, didn't slow, didn't bleed. Every missed swing destroyed more of the arena, every impact shook the foundations, and slowly, incrementally, I realized something was wrong. Lucian was slowing down. I saw it in the way his movements became fractionally less fluid, the way he took a half-second longer to dodge, margins getting tighter. The way his counterstrikes lacked the explosive power they should have had. Something was wrong. He should be faster, stronger. He was ancient, powerful, one of the oldest vampires in North America. This thing shouldn't be pushing him back. Unless. I watched closer, saw the way his skin looked slightly gray under the lamplight. The way his movements, despite their supernatural speed, lacked the raw power I'd seen when he'd grabbed Magnus by the throat. Poison. Silas had poisoned him. Not enough to kill outright. Just enough to weaken. Just enough to ensure he'd lose this fight. That Magnus's plan would succeed. The executioner's next swing connected. Not fully. Glancing blow. But enough. The hammer caught Lucian's left shoulder. Bone shattered with a sound like kindling snapping. He flew across the arena like a rag doll, hit the stone wall hard enough to crack it, left a crater in the rock, slid down, leaving a trail of black blood. He tried to stand, failed, tried again. His left arm hung at an unnatural angle, broken, useless. Blood, black, not red, seeped from a cut above his eye, dripping onto the stone floor. The crowd of vampires leaned forward as one, drawn by the scent of blood and violence. Scenting victory. The end. 200 predators watching an alpha fall. Magnus smiled, already tasting triumph. Lucian struggled to his feet, cradling his shattered arm against his chest. He looked at me across the arena, mouthed 2 words with lips going gray. Run, now. The executioner raised its hammer for the killing blow, both hands gripping the handle, muscles bunching for maximum force. I didn't run, not away, toward. My para-rescue training took over completely, drowning out fear with purpose. Assess the patient. Act decisively. Adapt to conditions. The mission was save the patient. Everything else was just noise that didn't matter. I sprinted across the arena floor, boots slapping stone. Heard Theron shout something in a language I didn't understand. Heard Magnus laugh, genuinely delighted by this development. Heard 200 vampires gasp as the fragile human threw herself between the executioner and its target like a shield made of flesh. I slid on my knees across the stone, felt skin tear, didn't care. Grabbed Lucian, pulled his broken body against mine, made myself a barrier. Looked up at the executioner looming above us. "Stop," I commanded, voice steady, firm. The tone I'd used with dying soldiers who needed to believe I could save them, who needed an anchor in chaos. "Your fight is with him, not with both of us. You kill me, you violate the terms of honorable combat. The Council will destroy you for breaking their laws." The executioner paused, tiny brain processing this unexpected complication. Confused by prey that should be running, but was instead protecting the target, behavior that didn't fit its programming. "Raven," Lucian gasped, black blood bubbling past his lips. "What are you doing?" Saving your life, like I'm paid to do, like you saved mine by offering that contract. I looked down at him, at gold eyes fading to gray. You're poisoned, Silver. Silas put it in your synthetic blood supply weeks ago. You're dying slowly. That's why you're losing. That's why you're weak. Then I'm already dead. This just makes it faster. Run. Save yourself. Live for Jacob. No. I pulled the combat knife from my boot. Air Force issue, 6 inches of folded steel I'd carried through Desert Storm and every day since. I'd cleaned wounds with it, cut through seatbelts, dug shrapnel from flesh, saved lives. Now I pressed the blade to my palm. The same hand I'd cut on glass 4 weeks ago. The scar tissue parted easily, muscle memory from the first wound. Blood welled up immediately, red, hot, smelling like lilies and ozone and whatever the hell made me Vitalis, whatever genetic lottery had made my blood valuable enough to kill for. The arena went silent. Every vampire in the chamber inhaled simultaneously. 200 predators catching the scent of the rarest blood in existence, hunger rippling through them like a wave. "What are you doing?" Lucian's voice was horrified, trying to pull away. "Rule 3, I said, pressing my bleeding palm toward his mouth. "If I bleed, I run. But you know what? I'm changing the rules. New rule. I bleed and you fight. You drink. You heal. You remember why you've survived 680 years. You remember what you're protecting." I pressed my bleeding hand to his lips, felt his fangs against my skin. "Drink, Lucian. Trust me like I trusted you." For a moment he resisted with everything he had. I felt his whole body tense, every muscle fighting. Felt him trying to turn his head away. The gold in his eyes flickered, died, came back as black pits rimmed with fire. Then hunger won the war with discipline. His fangs descended fully. Longer than I'd imagined, longer than seemed possible, sharp as surgical steel, and twice as deadly. They pierced my palm, sinking deep into muscle. Pain exploded up my arm, white-hot and burning, like every nerve ending had been set on fire simultaneously and doused with acid. I screamed. Couldn't help it. Couldn't stop it. The pain was beyond anything I'd experienced in 42 years of hard living. Beyond gunshot wounds and burns and broken bones. This was my life being pulled out through my veins, my soul being drunk like wine. Lucian drank, and the transformation began. His broken arm snapped back into place, bones grinding together with sounds that made my stomach turn. Healing in seconds. The cuts on his face closed, skin knitting together like watching a film in reverse, scars forming and fading. But it didn't stop there. His skin began to glow, faint at first, barely noticeable, then brighter, stronger. Golden light pulsing beneath the surface like he'd swallowed the sun itself, like divinity was burning through his veins. The gray pallor from the poison burned away, consumed by light. His eyes opened, no longer gold, no longer black. Pure white light blazing in his skull, like stars had replaced his eyes. The temperature spiked. The cold that always surrounded him reversed violently. Heat radiated off his body in waves. Steam rose where his tears, red as wine, hit the stone floor and evaporated instantly. He released my hand, licked the wound closed with a tongue that seared like a brand, cauterizing the injury. The bleeding stopped instantly, sealed. He stood, and the crowd gasped as one. Even the elders leaned forward on their thrones, ancient creatures, witnessing something they'd never seen. Lucian Devereaux didn't look like a vampire anymore. He looked like something from mythology pulled into reality. A god of war draped in human skin. Power crackled around him visibly, the air distorting with heat. The stone beneath his feet cracked from the sheer force of his presence, spiderwebs spreading outward. The executioner brought its hammer down with all its considerable strength. Lucian caught it, one hand. The impact should have pulverized his arm, should have driven him through the floor. Instead, the shockwave blew dust off the arena floor in a perfect circle. Cracked the executioner's weapon, sent tremors through the entire chamber that made gas lamps swing wildly, shadows dancing. "My turn," Lucian said. His voice had layers now, harmonics, like 100 voices speaking in perfect unison across centuries. He squeezed. The iron handle of the warhammer groaned, protested, cracked, shattered. Metal fragments rained down like confetti, clanging against stone. The executioner roared, swung its massive fists. Each blow carried enough force to demolish buildings, to cave in walls. Lucian moved between the strikes, like smoke, untouchable, reading the attacks before they came. He appeared behind the creature in a blur of speed. "You were built to kill vampires," Lucian said, voice echoing with power. "Designed to execute our kind. But I'm not just a vampire right now. I'm something you've never faced. Something that hasn't walked this earth in centuries." He lifted the 8-foot creature off the ground by the back of its armored neck, muscles not even straining. Slammed it down with enough force to crater the stone floor 5 feet deep, the impact booming like thunder. The executioner didn't move again. Unconscious, defeated, broken, silence, absolute, total. The kind of silence that exists when everyone forgets how to breathe. Lucian turned to face the council, the golden glow already beginning to fade from his skin, but his eyes still burning with impossible light. "Is the debt paid, Elder Theron?" Theron stood slowly, 900 years of experience processing what he'd just witnessed. Veteran of the Crusades, builder of empires. And even he looked shaken to his core. "The right of protection is satisfied. The combat trial is concluded in your favor. The Vitalis remains under your guardianship with full council immunity. No vampire shall touch her without facing your wrath." "And Magnus?" Lucian's gaze found the vampire in the white suit, found him trying to edge toward the exit. "He orchestrated this entire situation, poisoned me through Silas, bought my advisor, manufactured evidence, forced this trial, and he confessed publicly to murdering my sister 246 years ago. What is the council's judgment on his crimes?" Theron looked at Magnus with eyes that had seen empires fall. "Did you pay Silas Core to betray his master Magnus Vale?" Magnus's smile faltered, cracking. "I offered him fair compensation for information, investment intelligence, not betrayal, just business." "You paid him $5 million to sabotage Lucian's security and poison his blood supply," I said, my voice weak from blood loss but clear. I pulled out my phone with my good hand. I have his phone, downloaded before he realized I'd taken it, the texts, the bank transfers. Encrypted communications, proof of everything including plans to frame Lucian for masquerade violations. I'd grabbed Silas's phone 3 days ago during a late-night visit, cloned it, using Air Force intelligence techniques they don't teach in basic training. Downloaded everything, encrypted it, backed it up in 3 locations including cloud storage. I handed my phone to Theron. The elder studied the screen, scrolling through evidence with increasing focus. His expression remained neutral, but his grip on my phone tightened enough to crack the case, spiderweb fractures spreading across the screen. "Silas Core," Theron said quietly, voice carrying absolute authority. "Approach the council." Silas stepped forward from the shadows, looking smaller with each step. A century of loyal service erased by a $5 million bribe and dreams of power. He still wouldn't look at Lucian, couldn't face what he'd betrayed. "You have betrayed your master in the most fundamental way, violated the sacred bond of service that sustains our society, attempted to destabilize a council-sanctioned territory for personal gain. The penalty is exile from vampire society. You are stripped of your rank, your assets, your protections, and your place among us. You have 48 hours to leave North America. If you are found on this continent after that deadline, you will be destroyed without trial. Do you understand these terms?" Silas nodded, broken. He didn't look at anyone, just turned and walked into the shadows, becoming smaller with each step. Gone. "And you, Magnus Vale." Theron's voice carried judgment final and irrevocable. "You attempted to seize territory through deception and bribery. You poisoned a fellow vampire through an intermediary. You violated the sanctity of council proceedings with manufactured evidence. You confessed to murdering a Vitalis in 1780. Your assets in Louisiana are hereby seized. $2 billion to be distributed to the families your schemes have harmed and to establish protective funds. You can't, Magnus started, taking a step forward. I can. I have. The judgment is rendered and cannot be appealed. Theron sat back down, dismissing Magnus with the gesture. $180,000 will be allocated immediately to Jacob Thorne's continued medical care as restitution. The remainder will fund the Vitalis Protection Accord, a new law effective immediately. Any vampire who harms, coerces, or attempts to claim a Vitalis without their explicit consent will face immediate execution. No trial, no appeal, no mercy. The Vitalis are under permanent council protection. Magnus's violet eyes burned with rage, barely contained, with plans for revenge already forming. But he was smart enough not to argue with 900 years of absolute authority, backed by 4 other elders. He turned to leave, white suit dirty from arena dust. He stopped next to Lucian, close enough to whisper, "This isn't over, Devereaux. You've made an enemy who has eternity to plot revenge." "Yes," Lucian said quietly, voice still layered with power. "It is over, and you're going to understand that now." He moved faster than Magnus could react, faster than thought. His hand closed around the vampire's throat, lifted him off the ground effortlessly. Magnus struggled, clawed at the hand, 300 years of strength meaning nothing against Vitalis-enhanced power. "You said my sister was delicious," Lucian said, voice calm, conversational, absolutely terrifying in its control. "Amelie, 1780. You were the one who killed her, who drained her over 3 days, who destroyed my family and left me with 246 years of unanswered grief." Magnus's eyes widened with realization and fear. "I didn't—" "You just confessed. In front of 200 witnesses, you said you drained her. Only the vampire who killed her would know what she tasted like, would remember her blood." Lucian's grip tightened, black blood beginning to seep from Magnus's mouth. "I've waited 246 years for this, for proof, for justice." "Lucian," Theron said, not commanding, just warning. "He is defeated, humiliated, his assets seized. Let the council handle his punishment according to our laws. The council will exile him, give him a chance to rebuild in another territory. Another century, he'll be back, stronger, more careful." Lucian looked at me, his eyes human again, gold returning, sad and old and tired. "But my sister was 17. She died screaming. And the man who killed her just threatened to do the same to Raven." He looked back at Magnus, 3 centuries of predator meeting 6 centuries of apex predator. "I can't let that happen. If you kill him here," Theron warned, "you violate council law. You become oath-breaker, subject to execution yourself." Lucian was silent for a long moment, grip still tight on Magnus's throat. Then he opened his hand. Magnus dropped to the floor gasping, coughing black blood onto white fabric. "You're right," Lucian said, turning his back dismissively. "Revenge isn't worth Raven's safety, or Jacob's future, or the peace I've finally found." He walked back toward me. "Leave, Magnus. Now, while I still have the control not to rip you apart." Magnus scrambled to his feet, dignity shattered. Started toward the exit, moving as fast as injured pride would allow. He was 3 steps from the tunnel entrance when the executioner moved. Not unconscious, not defeated, playing dead, waiting with predator patience. The creature's massive hand shot out with blinding speed, grabbed Magnus's ankle in a grip like iron. Pulled. Magnus went down hard, hit stone face first, started to scream in genuine terror. The executioner didn't speak, didn't explain, didn't hesitate. Just gripped Magnus's leg and squeezed, bone shattered like glass. Magnus shrieked, tried to escape with all 3 centuries of accumulated power. But the creature was relentless, designed specifically to kill vampires, built for this purpose. It pulled Magnus close, opened its mouth, revealing rows of teeth designed to crack vampire bones and consume vampire flesh. It fed, quickly, efficiently. Like a machine processing meat, like it had been starving for 2 centuries, and this was the first meal worth having. The screaming stopped after 30 seconds. After that, it was just sounds, wet, crunching, final. When the executioner finished, there was nothing left of Magnus Vale but a white suit stained black with blood, and the memory of violet eyes, wide with terror, and the knowledge that sometimes justice comes from unexpected places. The creature looked at Theron, waiting for judgment or command. "Return to your cell," Theron commanded, voice carrying ancient authority. "You acted within your rights and programming. The vampire threatened your keeper. You protected your designated territory. Well done." The executioner nodded once, almost respectfully, lumbered back through the gate, each step shaking the floor. It sealed behind the creature with the grinding of ancient metal, locking away until the next trial in another century. Theron looked at Lucian with something that might have been approval. "The debt is paid in full. The territory remains secure under your stewardship. The Vitalis is protected by council decree. This tribunal is adjourned." The 5 elders stood, robes whispering against stone like ghosts. They filed out through doors I hadn't noticed, disappearing into darkness. The crowd of 200 vampires began to disperse, murmuring, processing what they'd witnessed, what it meant for the future. I tried to stand. My legs gave out, the blood loss catching up with brutal efficiency, the adrenaline crash hitting like a freight train loaded with exhaustion. I started to fall. Lucian caught me before I hit the ground, cradled me against his chest. His skin was warm now, actually warm, human temperature. The Vitalis blood still working through his system, still burning like sunlight in his veins. "Foolish, brave woman," he murmured, voice gentle. "You could have died, should have died. What you did was insane. But I didn't die, and neither did you." I looked up at him through fading vision, everything getting dim at the edges. We won. We survived. Not quite the same thing. Close enough for government work. He carried me toward the tunnel, toward the surface, toward a world that suddenly had one less monster and a little more justice, however brutal. Behind us, on the arena floor, my blood stained the ancient stone. A reminder, a warning, a promise written in red. The Vitalis had teeth, and she'd chosen her vampire. Everything else was just details written in blood and fire. 8 months later, the Louisiana sun felt like a blessing instead of a curse. I stood on the balcony of my apartment in the Garden District, coffee in hand, watching oak trees older than the city sway in the morning breeze. Not the cramped studio in Queens anymore. Not leaking ceilings and sirens every night and fear that never quite left. This was 3 bedrooms with hardwood floors and a view of mansions that had stood since before the Civil War. This was security. This was home. In need, Jacob was practicing piano, fingers finding notes with increasing confidence. His hair had grown back thick and dark and healthy. The leukemia was in remission, the experimental treatment exceeding every expectation. Dr. Morrison used words like miraculous and unprecedented recovery. I used words like expensive and worth every single penny and every drop of blood. The treatment had worked. 72% survival rate, and Jacob was firmly in the lucky majority. He'd celebrated his 10th birthday last month with a telescope he'd wanted since he was 6, spending every clear night mapping constellations and talking about becoming an astronaut who'd walk on Mars. He was going to live, going to grow up, going to have a future. That was all that mattered. Everything else was just details. My phone buzzed. Text from Lucian. Council meeting in 20 minutes. Don't be late. Theron particularly dislikes tardiness from the chief medical officer. I smiled, texted back with practiced ease. I'm never late. You're just chronically early after 680 years of paranoia. 3 dots appeared, then semantics. Bring the quarterly Vitalis protection reports. And real coffee, not that synthetic garbage from the break room. I grabbed my briefcase, the quarterly reports inside detailing the Protection Accord's expansion. 7 more Vitalis identified worldwide through genetic screening, all placed under council protection with employment offers, housing, health care. The fund Magnus's seized assets had created was changing lives across 3 continents, saving lives, giving people choices instead of forcing them into servitude or death. Turned out vampire politics could be a force for actual good when properly motivated by public embarrassment and a near war. I drove to Devereaux Tower through streets that felt like home now instead of enemy territory. My car was sensible, a hybrid that got good mileage and didn't require selling organs to afford, the kind of car that said financially stable professional without screaming new money. The office looked the same, marble and money and floor-to-ceiling windows, but it felt different, transformed by familiarity. This wasn't enemy territory anymore. This was where I worked, where I belonged, where I'd found purpose beyond survival. Lucian was at his desk, reviewing contracts with the focus of someone who'd been doing this for centuries. He looked up when I entered, smiled. The expression transformed his face, made him look less like a predator and more like a man who'd finally learned how to rest. Coffee, reports, and you're only 10 minutes early instead of your usual 15. Should I be concerned about your health? Jacob had growing pains last night. Apparently getting taller hurts when you're 10. Who knew? I set down the coffee, expensive dark roast from the cafe on Magazine Street he preferred. How's the sunwalking progressing? Fading gradually, as expected. Down to maybe 6 hours of sunlight tolerance per day now. He accepted the coffee, sipped, savored like it was wine. The initial 72-hour immunity from your blood has stabilized to this consistent daily window. The Vitalis blood metabolizes faster each month, but plateaus at this level with regular transfusions. 6 hours is 6 more than I've had in 680 years. I'm not complaining. We'd worked out a sustainable system after extensive medical testing. Twice weekly blood donations, carefully measured and monitored. Enough to maintain his ability to walk in daylight without endangering my health or ability to function. The phlebotomist was excellent, professional, made it as painless as modern medicine allowed. And in return, I got to watch the King of New Orleans stand on his balcony at noon and feel sunlight on his face without burning. Got to see him close his eyes and remember what it was like to be human, to be warm, to be alive instead of just animated. It was worth every needle stick, every moment of dizziness after donation. The Council wants to extend the Vitalis Protection Accord to South America next quarter, Lucian said, pulling out files with typical efficiency. 3 confirmed Vitalis identified in Brazil through genetic screening, 2 in Argentina. They're living in poverty, completely unaware of what they carry in their veins, vulnerable to anyone who discovers them. Then we bring them in, offer protection and real choices, give them what I got. Theron agrees. He's authorized funding from the Magnus settlement. We'll send representatives next month to make contact. We, not I, not my decision alone. We, partnership. The word we'd carefully avoided for 8 months while building something neither of us quite knew how to name. The relationship that wasn't quite friendship, wasn't romance, but was something deeper. Something forged in blood and combat and the mutual understanding that we'd both been alone too long. How's Jacob's schooling progressing? Lucian asked, casual, but genuinely interested in ways that still surprised me. Good. Great, actually. Straight A's across the board. He wants to apply for space camp this summer. Thinks he can convince NASA to let a 10-year-old audit astronaut training. I laughed. Couldn't help it. He's ambitious. I like that quality. Ambition properly channeled builds empires. Lucian pulled out an envelope, expensive stationery with his personal seal. Give him this. Early birthday gift for next month. I opened it, knowing I shouldn't be surprised anymore by his generosity. Inside was a check made out to Jacob Thorne, $50,000. Lucian, this is too much. It's a scholarship, educational fund, for whatever school he wants to attend, whatever career he chooses to pursue. I never had children, never will. Vampires are sterile, part of the curse. His voice was matter-of-fact about biology. But Jacob, He paused, choosing words carefully. He reminds me of why I fought so hard to survive all these centuries, to build this empire. Legacy isn't measured in dollars or territories. It's measured in the lives you touch, the futures you make possible, the children who get to grow up because you made the right choice. I folded the check, tucked it away carefully. Thank you, from both of us. You've given him everything. Thank you, Raven, for running into that arena when every rational instinct told you to run away, for offering your blood when it could have killed you, for being brave enough to believe that monsters can choose to be more than their hunger, more than their history. The council meeting was brief and efficient. Updates on the Vitalis Protection Accord expansion, budget approvals for South American operations, security protocol revisions. I presented the quarterly reports with professional competence. Theron asked penetrating questions. I answered with data and projections. The former Air Force para-rescue who'd become Chief Medical Officer to Vampire Society, bridging two worlds. Afterward, Lucian and I stood on his office balcony, 40 floors above New Orleans. The sun was setting, painting the city gold and crimson and purple. Beautiful. Temporary. Like everything worth having. I never asked, Lucian said quietly, watching the sunset. That night in the arena, when you cut your hand, when you gave me your blood knowing it could kill you, why did you really do it? Because you needed it. And I could help. Simple as that. It's never that simple. I thought about it, about Jacob and Desert Storm, and all the times I'd run toward danger because the mission mattered more than fear, because some things were worth dying for. In para-rescue, we have a motto we live by, that others may live. We jump out of helicopters into combat zones. We pull people from burning wreckage. We perform surgery with nothing but combat knives and morphine. We do it because someone has to, because lives are worth saving, even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous, even when it costs everything you have. I looked at him, gold eyes, reflecting sunset like mirrors. You're 680 years old. You've seen empires fall and rise again. You've survived wars and plagues and betrayals that would destroy anyone else. But that night, in that arena, you were just a man fighting impossible odds to protect someone he cared about. How could I not help? How could I run when you needed me most? I'm not a man, Raven. I'm a vampire, a killer. I've taken thousands of lives over the centuries, maybe tens of thousands. I'm not worth saving. Maybe not. But the version of you who stood between Magnus and me, the version who used his last breath to tell me to run to safety, the version who spent 8 months building the Vitalis Protection Accord to save people like me, that version is worth every drop of blood I gave, and I'd do it again without a moment's hesitation. He was quiet for a long time, processing. Then he did something unexpected. He knelt, not falling, not collapsing, a deliberate, formal gesture. The kind knights made to their queens in stories, the kind that acknowledged debt and respect and something deeper than words could fully capture. I, Lucian Devereaux, Vampire Lord of New Orleans, swear to protect Jacob Thorne as if he were my own blood, to guard his future with everything I possess, to ensure no harm befalls him so long as I exist in this world. This I swear before you, Raven Thorne, and before whatever gods still listen to the prayers of the damned. I knelt beside him, took his cold hands in my warm ones, squeezed. And I, Raven Thorne, swear to stand with you, to be your partner in this strange world we've built together, to offer my blood freely, not as a servant, but as an equal, to remind you every single day that you're more than your hunger, you're more than your history, you're the vampire who chose honor over revenge, and that makes you worth saving. We stayed there, kneeling on a balcony above a city that didn't know it was ruled by monsters who'd learned to be better than their nature, didn't know that justice sometimes had fangs and mercy sometimes required blood sacrifice. The sun set completely. Stars appeared in the darkening sky. New Orleans lit up below us like a constellation, 1,000,000 lights representing 1,000,000 lives, all of them unaware that their safety depended on a 42-year-old former Air Force medic and a 680-year-old vampire who'd learned to walk in sunlight. 8 months after the trial, my combat knife sat in a display case in the council chamber, behind glass, protected. Not a weapon anymore, a symbol, a reminder. Raven learned that honor isn't about the battles you win, it's about the people you protect when every rational instinct tells you to run. It's about offering your blood to save a monster because you see the man he's fighting to become. And Lucian learned that at 680 years old, the greatest legacy isn't territory or wealth or power. It's giving a desperate woman the chance to save her grandson. It's watching that grandson grow healthy and strong. It's understanding that sometimes the people society dismisses as just a server are the only ones brave enough to serve justice when the powerful fall. Because sometimes the waitress who spills wine on the vampire king isn't clumsy. She's exactly where she needs to be, exactly when she needs to be there, to start a war, to end a centuries-old vendetta, to prove that the strongest bonds aren't forged in romance or power. They're forged in blood and honor and the simple truth that some people are worth bleeding for. If you were Raven, would you have run into that arena? Would you have offered your blood to save a vampire who'd spent centuries as a monster? Would you have trusted that he could be more? Tell me in the comments. Because the world needs more people who run toward danger instead of away from it, who choose honor over safety, who understand that the greatest strength isn't living forever. It's having something worth dying for. And if this story reminded you why courage matters, why sacrifice means something, why honor is more than just a word carved on tombstones, then subscribe. Because there are more stories out there, more battles fought in shadows, more ordinary people doing extraordinary things when the world demands heroes, and every one of them deserves to be told.